Let me invite our next speaker, Pedro Alonso. I'm just going to set up your PowerPoint. He needs no introduction because he's been one of the co-organizers, but just to briefly mention, Pedro is professor, associate professor at the Faculty of Architecture, Design and Urban Studies at the Pontificia Universidad Católica. Pedro.
Thank you, Christian, for all the organization. I thought it was in English. Sorry about that. I prepared this in English. Anyhow, you have the translation. In November 2017, the chief architect of Moscow, Sergei Kuznetsov, organized a plenary session called Architecture for the Masses, Overcoming Stereotypes, in the context of the 6th St. Petersburg International Cultural Forum. I had the opportunity to participate as a guest speaker to this meeting at the State Hermitage Museum in Russia, which aimed at addressing the contemporary status of mass architecture, as they said, both in Russia and in the world. The introductory briefing to this meeting wondered whether mass architecture can be unique, if not in a figurative sense, at least from the point of view of artistic quality. If so, they asked, how can this be achieved by using both legislative means and innovative technologies? This plenary session was timely. It tackled a rather urgent urban and political agenda. It came at the very same time President Vladimir Putin, who actually was in St. Petersburg for the opening ceremony of this event, had recommended the mayor of Moscow, Sergei Sobyanin, to demolish all of Moscow remaining Khrushchevskas, the 5-story large concrete panel buildings built after a course of action set by Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev in his famous 1954 speech titled On the Extensive Introduction of Industrial Methods and Improving the Quality of and Reducing the Costs of Construction. As the chief architect of the city of Moscow, Kuznetsov is therefore in the forefront of the implementation of what was called the Renovatsiya program, officially launched on February 21st, 2017. Moving from mass production to mass destruction means the demolition of over 8,000 reinforced concrete structures, totalizing 25 million square meters of housing. According to the announced figures, the project will affect 1.6 million people, roughly the population of Barcelona, will cover more than 10% of the total housing stock in Moscow, will cost 3 trillion rubles, and will take 15 years to complete. The scale of the plan is of course unprecedented, probably the biggest program of erasure of modern architecture in world history. According to the Russian newspaper RBC, and I quote, Putin agreed that the program is good and right because we realized that in 10 years all these 5-story buildings will become dilapidated housing. In their opinion, the Khrushchevskas are very difficult to repair, and therefore they are cheaper to destroy than to dismantle. Both Sobyanin and the vice mayor Marat Krasnulin seem to agree that extraordinary measures demand extraordinary solutions. In fact, the city leaders seem to believe that the program is an absolute necessity and a gift for the Moscovites. Together with the demolition, the massive resettlements of residents in new buildings will become Sobyanin's political flagship. I quote, thanks to which the mayor will leave a mark in history as a man who rebuilt Moscow. But while one of the objectives behind the demolition might be to boost Sobyanin's popularity, so far it seems to have effectively done the exact opposite, sparking consecutive protests during May 2017, gathering over 36,000 people. In political terms, Sobyanin's mark in history could be seen as an attempt to override Khrushchev's own reconstruction of Moscow. Not by chance, overcoming stereotypes means for Kuznetsov to ask the exact opposite question that Khrushchev was demanding in his transcendental speech of '54, where instead of wondering whether mass architecture can be unique from the point of view of aesthetic quality, the first secretary of the Communist Party openly criticized the way, and I quote, "young architects hardly wait to cross the threshold of their architectural schools before waiting and wanting to design nothing but unique buildings and to hurry to erect monuments for themselves." Khrushchev's stance could be seen as an attempt to critique the fussy, elaborate style of late Stalinism, which began to be associated with petty bourgeois Philistine kitsch. In rejecting Stalinism and in order to symbolically de-Stalinize the country, the industrial mass production of large concrete panel buildings was embraced against certain architects, I quote Khrushchev, that tried to justify their incorrect principles on the superfluities of their designs by referring to the necessity of fighting constructivism. Explicitly defending the Russian avant-garde, the constructivists, and the elimination of all superfluous ornamentation, Khrushchev criticized architects for waving a flag to conceal the wastage of the state resources. So the protests against the renovation program have shown that the mayor's plans have not been perceived properly as a gift for Muscovites, and that they should resist its implementation. As disclosed by the RBC, this has produced yet another side argument on the absolute necessity for demolition. After analyzing the criminogenic map of Moscow, I quote, "the authorities have found out that 5-story blocks outdo the entire city in terms of crime rate. And because Khrushchev's legacy belongs to a low-cost housing, the higher proportion of residents have a low social status, including alcoholics," they say. The mayor's office has therefore decided to reduce crime in Moscow by demolishing concrete buildings. Beyond the clear deformations contained in this report, and in a rather unexpected turn, it seems to completely reverse Adolf Loos' famous association between ornament and crime. After about 100 years, delinquency now becomes associated to the lack of ornament. Using Loos' very sentence, we might conclude that if someone who lives in a bare Khrushchevka dies at liberty, it means that he or she has died a few years before committing murder. At the height of modernity, Khrushchev was not just aligning himself with Loos, a struggle against ornamentation, but was directly quoting Walter Gropius, who had insisted in saying, in relation to the architects of the future, that, I quote, "if he wants to rise to the top again, he will be forced by the trends of events to draw closer once more to the building production." In fact, following Gropius, Khrushchev decisively transformed the modernist discourse of prefabrication into actual state policy by proposing that, I quote, "if an architect wants to be in step with life, he must know and be able to employ new progressive materials, reinforced concrete, and above all, must be an expert in cost-saving construction." It goes without saying that it was him, and not Gropius or Waxman or Corbusier, who turned the modernist discourse into reality. utterly fulfilling the most cared aspiration of the modernist dream about the industrialization of housing, resolving on its way the Lewisian rejection of ornament and adhering to Siegfried Giedien's dictum that construction should be conform. If the ruthless industrialization of housing prompted by Khrushchev achieved something, it was the successfully matching of Taylorism and Fordism within a transnational industry for the mass production of large concrete panels. Against this backdrop, and as a perfect example of the pendulum of history, today Renovacilla program could become Putin's way of withdrawing concrete from modern architecture, while at the same time de-Khrushchevizing the Russian Federation, if I can use that term. Yet, Khrushchev's remembrance of constructivism has a deeper connection to the Russian avant-garde of the 1920s, in particular to the work of Kazimir Malevich. As we have argued elsewhere, where large concrete panels are to architecture, what Malevich Black Square is to painting: irreducible, extra-spatial, extra-temporal, and extra-historical elements. They embody a reductionism and a call to simplification in search of a minimal but real point of support. Like the Black Square, the non-objective concrete panel was the most radical gesture of the acceptance of the total destruction of all the tradition of European arts and Russian architecture. It announced the death of any cultural nostalgia, of any sentimental attachment to the cultures of the past. In such a way, concrete panels, as the Black Square, behold a destructive path already conceived by Malevich in his text on the Museum of 1919, where he says, and I quote him, "Life knows what it is doing, and if it is striving to destroy, one must not interfere, since by hindering we are blocking the path to a new conception of life that is born with us. In burning a corpse, we obtain 1 gram of powder. Accordingly, thousands of graveyards could be accommodated in a single chemist's shelf. We can make a concession to conservatives by suggesting that they burn all past epochs, since they are dead, and so set up a pharmacy." At first glance, this destructive drive, and not crime or technical necessity, would be enough to condemn the Khrushchevskis. But one difference between art and architecture emerges immediately. The mass destruction of 8,000 concrete buildings will not end up in setting up a pharmacy, but in the creation of a colossal new topography of debris, the result of destroying 10 million cubic meters of reinforced concrete. In fact, Kuznetsov's inquiry on the artistic quality of mass architecture brings up the question whether it is possible or not to draw a comparison between the destruction of art collections and the mass destruction of collective housing. In art, the object could be characterized as always already being external to the subject. No matter how immersive the experience proposed by the artist is, people rarely live inside artworks. This relative position allows to contemplate, experience, cherish, and ultimately collect art. But the relationship between the subject with the architectural object is rather double, both external and internal. While buildings can be contemplated and appraised aesthetically, people do live inside them. In his brief essay on consumerism, Thomas Moulian, the Chilean author, elaborates some of Sigmund Freud's observations to explain that objects cannot be possessed when they lack interior space. You can only possess which has it. Possession, he explains, has to do with the control of the interior. And when an architectural object, by having interior space, is possessed by people, the object is more difficult to destroy. Accordingly, Freud Accordingly to Freud, and I quote, many symbols represent the womb of the mother, as wardrobes, stoves, and primarily the room. The room symbolism is related to the house symbol. Doors and entrances against become symbolic and of the genital opening. All these objects share a peculiarity of enclosing a space capable of being fulfilled or filled by something. This is why the same Malevich was reluctant to give his architectural explorations an interior and explain why he called the objects architectons, transforming the Russian female architecture for this masculine neologism. A male with no womb to be filled, an architecture conceived and displayed as pure externality. For Malevich, the only thing that matters is art, and art, living art, must always be ready to die. What could be worse than preserving dead architectural bodies just based on a discourse on necessity? By avoiding the architectons to be possessed, Malevich aimed at preserving architectonics from being preserved. Paradoxically, only when buildings enter the world of pure, absolute living art, they achieve the calm acceptance of their own fate, the destruction and disfiguration in the flows of time. This is a problem Sobyanin and Kuznetsov are facing. They may insist that the Khrushchevka flats are beyond redemption, but as long as they hold an interior, panel houses will be possessed by people that will not want to live. With Malevich, the only acceptable reason to the mass destruction of the Khrushchevkas should be an aesthetic one. However, we know that, sadly, perhaps, Sobyanin and Kuznetsov do not seem to have Malevich in mind. Even if they did, Malevich's argument seems to dissolve when it comes to mass production. In both art and architecture, the tension between destruction and conservation always relates to debates on individual and rather unique objects, and are rarely situated at the level of the collective production and reproduction of series. Therefore, perhaps unwillingly, any argument about the conservation of the Khrushchevkas is unavoidably trapped within the paradigm of the conservation of uniqueness, forcing the conservationist effort to find something that would make one particular housing project special. And while the Khrushchevkas are hard to destroy because people keep their economical function intact, from an aesthetic perspective, repetition emerged first and foremost as a resource against destruction. In fact, what is not unique cannot be destroyed. It will always be outlived by its copies. Aesthetically and symbolically, all replications are worth the same. In order to completely destroy the object, the only alternative would be to eliminate all the exemplars. And this should not be called destruction, this should be called extinction. If for very different reasons, capitalism, neoliberalism, let's say, is, like Malevich, neither nostalgic nor sentimental about the past. It only sees one kind of value, surplus value. Not by chance, different media have stressed the idea that the renovation program in Moscow is really about profiting from real estate development, as the demolition of thousands of buildings will clear up land in central Moscow that could be further densified by taller buildings within new urban layouts. Both the inhabitants' protests of May 2017 and recent initiative from heritage and conservation supporters are trying to offer both a critique and a reaction to this possibility. Strelka Institute professor Kuba Snopek, for instance, has written about the preservation of the spatial and cultural values of these prefabricated landscape of Moscow's micro-districts. Snopek's books on Belyayevo Forever brings the provocative statement that we should put the most generic of all states, obsolete states, on the UNESCO heritage list. What a paradox that within the generic, one state, one building, one compound would be the most generic. For Snopek, a separate Khrushchevka might not be impressive, but, I quote, the whole spatial system into which it is embedded is complex and extremely well thought out. The designer of the microdistrict studied them from all possible angles. Visual composition, public transport, functionality and health. But his idealized assessment must be confronted against their standing as an algorithm for the prefabrication of all aspects of life, resulting from a singular obsession with mass production where every aspect of reality had to be redrawn to fit a new generic type, no matter how harsh. As pointed out by Alexander de Hoop, this signalized that the organization of space could be subordinated completely to the purpose of increasing production. The announcement of the mass demolition of 8,000 old Khrushchevkas therefore largely exceeds particular buildings and urban spatial arrangements. Renovacija came as the final blow to a whole industrial complex that dominated production during the second half of the 20th century. Peeling to pieces recalls on Marx and Engel's famous observation that the bourgeoisie cannot exist without constantly revolutionizing all instruments of production. With them, the whole relation of society, all established national industries have been destroyed and are daily being destroyed. In this case, what has been destroyed is an entire vision of industry, one that was successfully implemented thanks to a centralized vision of planning and economy. By constantly revolutionizing the instruments of production, the mass destruction of mass production will be followed by the installation of a different kind of industry where building systems and urban planning will play a different role, if any. Architecture mobilized toward uniqueness as the care goal behind Kuznetsov's appeal will return to its normal mode in providing a velvet globe of aesthetics for the iron fist of the instrumental production of the capitalist built environment, as Jeremy Till would have it. Seen in this light, it is conservation and not socialism what seems to resist capitalist constant revolution of the means of production. In this setting, and I'm coming to a close, just 2 more slides, my own contribution to this plenary session in St. Petersburg was to show the manner in which this is a global history of transiting panels. I try to dismantle prevalent assumptions that keep characterizing panel houses as generic. On the contrary, we face the history of panels as the successful provision of mass housing across the Soviet territory, an industrial complex capable of housing thousands of millions of peoples, which ultimately stretched towards Siberia and all along Asia and the Eastern Bloc in countries like China, North Korea, Mongolia, Yugoslavia, East Germany, Hungary, Poland, Bulgaria, Albania, Romania, Czechoslovakia, also reaching Cuba and Chile. Taken in quantitative terms, the successes of such massive industrial apparatus haven't been matched in recent times and might never be matched in the concrete futures. It is unclear whether Sobyanin and Kuznetsov will in the end manage to implement the renovation program. But if they do, this will be only continuing a process already started, the mass destruction of mass production itself. The industrial complex from the 20th century did not include only buildings or spatial systems. It was composed by a more intricate network of elements, including standardization, mechanization, automation, transport logistics, assembly, architects, engineers, and proletarian workers. as well as policies, politics, and the state bureaucracy. These were all integrated components in larger industrial complexes encompassing the programming and delivering of production. They were all but nodes within a larger machine, a scattered object whose condition of existence has now ceased to exist. Thank you very much.
Hello? We have a microphone here if anyone would like to jump with a question. I do have questions myself, but so just to break the ice, there is something that struck me in your in the talk you gave, Pedro, is how perhaps we are in the West very bad about designing for obsolescence, and how destruction, in a way, doesn't account for the afterlife, and building as well, for the afterlife of materials. And I wonder whether you could comment on that. And as a side thought, which relates to both talks in a way, is whether this image of construction and the promise for the future will change eventually in the case of Chile. It seems that insurance companies and do not behave in Chile like they behave in other countries. And we don't know really, or we don't think in the way, for instance, people think of concrete building in Japan or the UK, where houses are meant to last on average 45 years. Here you can buy a house that is, or a flat, a concrete flat that is, I don't know, 50 years old. And we're just recently starting to see demolition, of course, of concrete buildings. And I wonder whether there is a difference, I don't know, something that connects both of your talks.
Yeah, thanks, Christian. One of the things that I like from this debate on panel houses is that they do not seem to belong to architecture, because architecture is about architects designing singular buildings, and prefabrication is about giving architects a different role, a less prominent role in a way. So their situation within account of the histories of architecture is relatively marginal. And I'm saying this because, as far as I can understand, in the Soviet Union, they thought they designed the buildings to last for only 20 years, because after 20 years, they would be able to make a better building. So they were not thinking on these buildings either as if they were eternal architecture, but they were thinking on these buildings as if they were like planes or rockets, like pieces of technology. So in 20 years, we will have a better technology. In 20 years, we will have a better buildings. I don't think that really the demolition of those buildings was taken into account when thinking this way, right? But they were thinking about technology evolving, so buildings evolving. And therefore, what is being done today is not that different from what someone like Khrushchev would have been thinking about. Like, yes, 50 years, better buildings. The question is that after 50 years, this old technology is going to be demolished. What's the next technology? And there is none. It's not the same. I mean, something that I didn't say is important perhaps is that they'll put down 10 million cubic meters of concrete in order to build 20 million cubic meters of concrete. I mean, it's not that concrete is going away, but the mind frame, the ideologies, and the utopian hopes, and all of that is different, including the idea that the buildings were part of a larger technical apparatus that was connecting buildings to machines rather than buildings to architecture in a way. I'm not sure I'm replying on your question, but this is about the afterlife. That from the beginning they have some sort of planned obsolescence within the mind frames of the people that were designing these techniques to last only a few years and then be replaced by better ones.
Another obvious question which you've partly answered is, what was the life expectancy of the Khrushchevi?
Mm-hmm.
And you're saying that it might only have been 20 years because of this expectation that they would be superseded by a better model.
Yeah.
But does anyone ever say, we expect these buildings to last for X number of years? Do we know whether they had a designed life?
I don't have an exact quotation for that, I have to say. But there are some literature that is saying that in 40 years we'll be having better systems. And actually it did happen. And if you look at the histories of Soviet prefabrication, they have first generation systems, second generation systems, and third generation systems. And if you have a look and you have the chance to go to Moscow or St. Petersburg, you have the three generations together. What is missing and is now accomplished is that once you have the fourth generation, you should start destroying the first, because you are superseding some model that is no longer useful. Of course, the thing is that this panel housing has this weird status where they are architecture in the end. I mean, people live in there. So these expectations of being demolished because of technology is encountering this wall against which is in connection to the actual lives of people that live in there, you know. But I don't have the exact quote of someone saying 30 years. I do have the exact quote that I can search of the people saying in which year they will have new housing, which is not that quite the same, but. Rodrigo.
Sí, no solamente mencionar bueno, parte de mi trabajo tiene que ver con la revisión de documentación no especializada, especialmente aquello que tenía que ver con la publicidad. Y es muy evidente que la publicidad, bueno, ignora la obsolescencia, tiene el interés justamente de justificar el empleo del material a través del ocultamiento también de ciertas acciones, o muy abiertamente de la inclusión de algunas ideas que evidentemente se tratan de eslogan comerciales, como esta dimensión supuestamente eterna que podría tener el material, y que la verdad es que inundó la prensa local a través de este concepto de que lo bueno es eterno, como lo señalaba brevemente en la presentación. Es muy evidente que eso es parte de un juego comercial exitoso, además, porque la prensa técnica a su vez lo asume como una verdad, aunque en la práctica eso se contrasta muy rudamente con la realidad. Por ejemplo, en el caso de los accidentes, eso es muy claro. Yo solamente presenté un accidente que marca el debut de la introducción del hormigón armado, pero lo cierto es que los accidentes están presentes en la historia de la construcción permanentemente, incluso después de que el hormigón armado se haya asentado como un sistema muy bien conocido por la teoría y por la práctica de la construcción. Por ejemplo, en 1925 hay otro accidente grave que no está mediado, por supuesto, por ningún sismo, como es el derrumbe de la caja de crédito hipotecario en 1925, que habría tenido quizás alguna incidencia en la regulación de las construcciones antisísmicas, que data de 1929. Habitualmente se le asigna al terremoto de Talca de 1928 digamos, la responsabilidad del punto que marcó la discusión sobre la ley de construcción antisísmicas, pero lo cierto es que algunos otros accidentes previos podrían haber contribuido también a que esa discusión se realizara tan rápido. Es una ley que se publica en un mes de discusión, por lo tanto da cuenta de que existen unos estudios que van a ser incorporados en la ley y que existían con anterioridad. Y lo mismo sucede, por ejemplo, en la construcción de puentes. Hay algunos casos bastante conocidos antes de la introducción de estructuras pretensadas, por ejemplo, puentes de hormigón armado que se derrumban en obras también debido, bueno, a malas condiciones del trabajo, de la construcción. Hay un caso bastante conocido en Vallenar que también provoca como 15 muertos, una cosa así, muere una gran cantidad de gente, y que anticipa después a la introducción de un sistema pretensado. De hecho, la misma empresa a la que se le derrumba el puente, después, pocos años después, es la primera en construir puentes pretensados en Chile, que es Yaconi Hermanos, en los años 60, a comienzos de los años 60.